Ambassador Crick Tal's third pair of appendages trembled, an emotion he convinced himself was righteous indignation, certainly not fear, as he addressed the Galactic Council. His crystalline exoskeleton refracted the chamber's lighting into a kaleidoscope of colors across the gathered delegates, or at least across the areas where one might expect faces among such varied species. "Esteemed members of the Council," he began, his translation matrix struggling to convey the outrage in his tone, "I must again draw your attention to the increasingly alarming behavior of our human colleagues." The word human came out in a tone suggesting it was some infectious plague. Commander Elena Doom Rodriguez, the human military liaison, didn't bother suppressing her eye roll. She sipped her coffee deliberately, her gaze locked on Tal. The sight made nearby photosynthean delegates float backward, their leafy appendages curling in distress for them. Coffee was categorized as an industrial solvent. "Just yesterday," Tal continued, his crystalline form humming at a frequency humans might liken to an irate Karen, "I witnessed 12 humans engaged in morning calisthenics in the shared recreational area of the embassy. They were sweating." He paused dramatically, letting the collective gasp of horror ripple through the chamber. "Oh no, basic biological functions," Rodriguez muttered under her breath, her datapad displaying the ongoing betting pool on which human activity would trigger the next complaint. Exercise currently stood at 31-1 odds. Furthermore, the ambassador's voice climbed an octave. "They've begun importing large quantities of ghost peppers. Need I remind the Council these vegetables register as chemical weapons on standard toxicity scanners?" In the gallery, Lieutenant James Reaper Ali discreetly bit into a ghost pepper-infused protein bar, causing the gaseous intelligence delegate beside him to briefly lose cohesion in shock. "And let us not overlook." Tal pressed on, now vibrating with indignation, their persistent attempts to introduce what they call game night as part of interspecies cultural exchange. Last week they suggested something called Twister, a game involving intentional limb entanglement. This suggestion triggered premature molting in 3B arachnoid delegates. Rodriguez reclined further into her seat, casually adding a note to her datapad reminder, Jenga night still on for Thursday. The Council chair, a mass of semi-sentient plasma contained in a protective field, pulsed with what might have been concern. "Ambassador Tal," it said, "while your concerns are noted, the humans remain technically within their rights under the cultural expression clauses of the Galactic Charter. They're so physical about everything." Tal's translator squeaked in frustration. "Yesterday I saw one open a nutrition packet with their teeth, like some sort of primitive predator." Rodriguez helpfully interjected. "The pull tab broke off, and Lieutenant Chen has already filed the appropriate packaging complaint in triplicate per Regulation 247 billion, subsection Gamma." "That's another thing," Tal rounded on her, his crystals chiming with agitation. "They actually read and follow every regulation. All of them. No species is that thorough unless they're plotting something." Rodriguez smiled serenely, taking another sip of coffee. "Ambassador, I assure you, we humans are simply striving to be model galactic citizens. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a high-intensity interval training session scheduled. Punctuality, of course, being another one of our troubling habits." She rose, paused, and glanced back. "Oh, an ambassador, this coffee you find so concerning. It's decaf. You should see what happens when we drink the real stuff." The sound of stress fractures forming in Tal's crystals followed her as she left, along with a wave of species hastily updating their threat assessments. Just another day in galactic politics. 4 hours later, an emergency alert blared through the Council chambers. "Attention," Council members announced the soothing AI voice. "The civilian transport vessel Stellar Serenity has been boarded by pirates from the Crimson Claw Consortium." Commander Rodriguez, fresh from her workout and still sweaty enough to make another crystalline delegate faint, checked her datapad. She smirked, The Stellar Serenity's manifest listed 15 humans returning from a team-building exercise, a euphemism for special operations training. This requires delicate diplomatic handling, HFY declared, crystals resonating with self-importance. We must form a committee to establish a task force for negotiating protocols. Oh, for Rodriguez muttered. Then louder, or we could just handle it. The chamber fell silent. Handle it, HFY's translator stammered. But they're pirates, with weapons and demands. Rodriguez stretched with a series of alarming joint pops. You're right, Ambassador. Let's do this properly, she tapped her communicator. Lieutenant Ali, connect me to the Stellar Serenity. The screen flickered, revealing a scarred Varian pirate leader. Behind the pirate captain, 15 humans sat cross-legged on the floor, resembling bored schoolchildren during assembly. One of them casually stretched as if the situation were a minor inconvenience. Greetings, Council, the pirate growled. We demand. Yeah, Rodriguez interrupted, sending a ripple of panic through several diplomats who instinctively clutched their protocol manuals. Look, I'm legally obligated to give you the chance to surrender Standard Regulation 394C subsection Delta. You understand how it works? The pirate blinked with all four eyes, confused. Surrender. We have hostages. We have weapons. Is that a yes or a no? Rodriguez asked impatiently. Because I've got a protein shake waiting, and it gets weird if it sits too long. One of the hostage humans raised his hand. Commander, if they say no, does that mean we're officially off the best behavior protocol? Rodriguez's smile was predatory, sharp enough to warrant copyright claims from a shark. Why, yes, Lieutenant Chan, it does. The humans perked up instantly, like children being told recess had been extended. One cracked their knuckles. Another began humming Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, a historical war anthem inexplicably classified as a religious hymn in the galactic archives. What's best behavior protocol? The pirate captain asked, suddenly questioning every life decision that had led him to this moment. Oh, it's nothing major, Rodriguez replied airily. Just a silly diplomatic requirement that humans tone down their natural tendencies, no flexing our full strength, avoiding Deathworld behavior, and generally trying not to upset other species. You know, civilized stuff, but since you're not interested in diplomacy, she glanced at her watch. I should mention that about 20 minutes ago, these fine folks had their afternoon coffee. Military grade, not the decaf nonsense. You're actually doing us a favor here. It's hard to find a proper outlet for all that energy. Behind her, one of the hostages began doing one-armed push-ups, while another enthusiastically explained the concept of parkour to a baffled junior pirate. Artificial gravity, the human added, is really just a suggestion. Rodriguez continued conversationally. Would you believe we're not even allowed to demonstrate how we turn harmless objects into weapons? Apparently, it's considered unsettling. For example, Lieutenant Chen once neutralized a rogue combat droid with just a paperclip and a rubber band. Purely self-defense, of course. Chen waved cheerfully at the camera, prompting the junior pirate to take an alarmed step back. So Rodriguez clasped her hands behind her back. What's it going to be? Surrender now, or do my people get to stop pretending they don't know 17 ways to weaponize that coffee maker behind you? You're bluffing, the pirate captain sputtered, though his voice cracked. No species is that adaptable, that creative, that tired of holding back, Rodriguez offered. Fun fact, humans evolved as persistence predators. We literally chased prey until it dropped from exhaustion. These days we call that cardio, and thanks to your timing, you've caught us at the sweet spot between caffeine buzz and workout energy. On screen, a human was enthusiastically explaining CrossFit to a horrified pirate, while another demonstrated burpee form to stay limber. Last chance, Rodriguez sang out. Going once. The pirate captain glanced between his crew and the increasingly restless humans. "You're all insane," he declared. "Going twice. The whole species is completely. Time's up," Rodriguez beamed. "Have fun, everyone. Don't forget to file action reports in triplicate, and try not to break the ship this time. The insurance paperwork is a nightmare." The feed cut off just as the humans rose in perfect unison, grins wide enough to terrify entire predatory species into reconsidering herbivory. In the stunned silence that followed, Ambassador HFY's crystals chimed with distress. "You can't just—" "Oh, but we can," Rodriguez replied cheerfully. "It's all in the regulations. Section 721F, Paragraph 3. In the event of hostile action against civilians, affected species may respond according to their cultural norms. You insisted on that clause, Ambassador. Something about cultural diversity." She checked her watch again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have paperwork to file. Coffee, anyone? No? Your loss." As she strolled out, the council finally understood. The humans hadn't been struggling to meet galactic standards, they had been holding themselves back. The sound of HFY's crystals fracturing under stress echoed faintly as security footage from a stellar Serenity continued to stream live. The delegates watched in growing horror as humanity's reputation somehow managed to exceed even their worst fears. Parkour Lieutenant Chen shouted gleefully, wall running before drop-kicking a pirate with caffeinated precision. Did he just use artificial gravity as a suggestion? A methane-breathing delegate bubbled in disbelief. "Yes," Rodriguez said calmly, filling out an excessive force form. "Yes, he did." "You should see what they do in the Zerg sections," Rodriguez remarked, just as the feed shifted to Cargo Bay 3. "There, Doctor." Zhao, the ship's civilian botanical researcher whose thesis on weaponizing plant life was classified on 17 planets, was showcasing exactly why humans should never be underestimated. She had converted her entire stock of ghost pepper extract into an improvised aerosol weapon. Now this, she declared to a group of hacking and coughing Tay pirates, is what we call spicing things up. She paused dramatically. "Get it? Because it's technically a spice silence." Tough crowd. In the council chamber, Ambassador HFY's crystalline structure audibly groaned under stress. "They're making puns in combat," he whispered in dismay. "They're making puns in combat." "Could be worse," Rodriguez offered with mock cheer. "At least they haven't started quoting action movies yet." "Yippee-ki-yay!" Mother Fu Lieutenant Ali's triumphant battle cry was mercifully cut off by static. The feed flickered again, this time to the ship's gym, where a group of pirates had unwisely cornered Sergeant Jackson, the human physical training instructor. He was armed only with a resistance band, which he was now using as a makeshift slingshot. "See, it's all about core engagement," he explained as the pirates looked increasingly desperate. "This is why we emphasize proper workout technique." Oh, and duck a protein shake canister shot past at near relativistic speed, narrowly missing the group. Over in the Zerg storage area, Chief Engineer Patel had reprogrammed inventory drones to play what she called 3D chess, but Spicy the drones efficiently herded pirates into geometric patterns as they flailed helplessly in zero gravity. "Look on the bright side," Patel quipped. "At least I'm not using the coffee maker." That would be uncivilized. Back in the council chamber, the delegates watched in stunned silence as the camera returned to Lieutenant Chen, now hanging upside down from a ceiling beam. He was critiquing the pirates' tactical choices like a disappointed professor. "Your first mistake," he began, dodging plasma bolts casually, "was assuming gravity is mandatory. Your second mistake was underestimating human cardiovascular endurance. And your third mistake," he pulled out a small bottle labeled emergency sriracha break glass for bland food. Was not checking what we classify as condiments." 3 pirates surrendered instantly at the sight of the bottle, clearly familiar with briefing materials on human cuisine. In the council chamber, a hive mind representative raised several appendages in confusion. "Are they? enjoying this. Oh, you have no idea, Rodriguez replied without looking up from her paperwork. Do you know how long they've had to pretend that parkour is just inefficient movement, or that hot sauce is only for food? It's like asking cats not to knock things off tables, technically possible, but fundamentally against their nature. The feed switched back to Dr. Xiao, now enthusiastically lecturing a captive audience of pirates on the Scoville scale. Several were hastily signing surrender documents as she added, and this is just commercial-grade capsaicin. Wait until I show you my research samples. Make it stop, Ambassador ZH Tall whimpered. Oh, it's almost over, Rodriguez assured him. They're running out of pirates to educate, though technically they are learning about human physiology and adaptability, so you could call it a cultural exchange program. Let me check the regulations. On screen, Chen had begun explaining free running to a traumatized pirate while dangling from a support beam. It's all about seeing your environment as a playground. Like this, he demonstrated a move so acrobatic it made several physics-based species reconsider their understanding of reality. Is this why humans insisted on those special insurance policies? A council member asked weakly. Oh, absolutely, Rodriguez said cheerfully, pulling out another form. Property damage coverage is a must when we're allowed to fully express ourselves. Speaking of which, anyone want to co-sign this requisition for repair drones? I think we should order in bulk. The sound of diplomats urgently updating their species threat assessments was nearly drowned out by Lieutenant Ali's distant cry of, "This is Sparta." I told them to stop watching historical documentaries, Rodriguez sighed, ticking the box for excessive cultural references on her report. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council's documentation committee had given up categorizing human combat violations and resorted to simply writing all of them in large letters across their reports. On the feed, the human so-called mandatory cultural sensitivity training continued in earnest. Chen, now on the ship's intercom, treated the combat like open mic night at a comedy club. Hey, pirates. What did the humans say to the gravity generator? Time to bring you down. The punchline was punctuated by the gravity in Section C deactivating. A council clerk hurriedly noted Violation 2749, weaponizing bad humor in combat. In the gym, Sergeant Jackson had turned his surroundings into a CrossFit session. Pirates count as resistance training, he barked. Remember, proper form while subduing hostiles, no workplace injuries. Is he conducting a fitness class during combat? Gij Tall asked weakly. Oh, absolutely, Rodriguez replied, filling out yet another form. He's been pushing to update the combat fitness curriculum. This is basically his practical exam. The feed shifted once more, showing Dr. Xiao now discussing the chemical properties of capsaicin while pirates literally tied up with resistance bands looked on in terror. And that's why humans can eat ghost peppers without dying. Fascinating, isn't it? Anyone want a taste? The universal translator somehow rendered their collective screams of no in 15 languages simultaneously. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Patel had repurposed the cleaning bots into an impromptu symphony orchestra, their warning beeps harmonizing to the flight of the bumblebee as they herded pirates into increasingly elaborate formations. I call this piece Surrender in B minor, she announced with pride. The documentation committee promptly recorded Violation 2750, inappropriate musical accompaniment to combat operations. Back in the main corridor, Lieutenant Chen was still in his element. Why don't pirates play cards? He quipped mid-backflip. Because someone's always sitting on the deck. The groan from his captive audience was almost as loud as the plasma bolts flying past. That doesn't even make sense in space, a pirate wailed. Neither does piracy without anti-grav training, yet here we are, Chen replied cheerfully. Oh, I've got another one. What's a pirate's favorite celestial body? Or asteroid? The council chamber was filled with the sound of multiple species collectively face-palming, if they even had appendages capable of it. And for my next trick, Chen announced, I'll demonstrate why humans insisted on reinforced ceiling panels. I call this move the falling star. What followed was an acrobatic display so impossible that several physics professors observing the feat immediately submitted their resignations. The council clerk hesitated before jotting down violation 2751, but ultimately crossed it out and replaced it with the simple notation physics. Just physics. Rodriguez, without looking up from her paperwork, added, "Be sure to note this as a successful mixed-species cooperation exercise." Cooperation Ambassador ZH Tall spluttered. "They're using pirates as exercise equipment." "Exactly," Rodriguez replied serenely. "Cultural exchange at its finest. Now, who wants to help me fill out these improvisational workout liability waivers?" As the sound of multiple species collectively re-evaluating their life choices echoed through the council chamber, Chen's voice rang out in the background. Why did the pirate buy an Apple product? Because he needed an eye patch. The council reconvened 12 hours later, now officially referring to the events as the Stellar Serenity Incident under 17 layers of classification. The human delegation, calm and professional as ever, took their seats, exuding an air of innocent competence, as though they hadn't just rewritten several laws of physics and combat doctrine. Commander Rodriguez approached the podium, a towering stack of meticulously organized paperwork in her arms. Color-coded tabs made the sheer volume of documentation somehow even more intimidating. "Members of the council," she began, her voice a beacon of diplomatic composure, "I am pleased to report that the situation has been resolved with minimal permanent structural damage to the vessel." She paused, flipping to a specific form. "The therapy bills for the pirates are, of course, being processed through the appropriate channels." "Minimal damage," J.H. Tall interjected, stress fractures visible on his crystalline frame. "There's a cargo bay where the artificial gravity now functions. Sideways. Chief Engineer Patel assures me that's a feature." "Not a bug," Rodriguez replied smoothly. "We're calling it innovative spatial reconfiguration. I have the forms right here if you'd like to review them." As if on cue, the human delegation settled into their usual routines. Chen quietly worked on his reports, though several delegates noted that his chair seemed to defy basic geometry. Dr. Xiao sipped tea demurely, her stash of weaponized condiments conspicuously absent. Even Sergeant Jackson stood at attention in full uniform, though he couldn't resist doing calf raises. The council chair flickered nervously. "In light of recent events, we have drafted several new regulations." "How thoughtful," Rodriguez replied with a smile that made several delegates visibly uncomfortable. The rules displayed on the screen were as follows. No gravity manipulation for recreational purposes. Condiments must be registered as potential weapons. Exercise equipment restricted to designated areas. Dad jokes banned during combat operations. Mandatory gravitational alignment in all ship sections. Coffee consumption to be monitored and regulated. These seem perfectly reasonable, Rodriguez agreed, to the visible discomfort of several delegates. Though I should note that, under Section 47 billion of the Cultural Preservation Act, we are still entitled to maintain our traditional practices during designated emergency scenarios. Traditional practices, someone squeaked. "Oh, you know," Rodriguez replied airily, "creative problem-solving, physical fitness," and of course she hefted the paperwork stack with a smile that could shatter nerves, complete and thorough documentation of all activities. She began flipping through the forms. "Here we have the reports for improvised weapon usage, non-standard gravity applications, cultural exchange activities." The pirates were remarkably educational about their perspective on human combat techniques, and naturally, the requisite insurance claims. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications sunk in. The humans hadn't just defeated the pirates, they'd done so while adhering to perfect regulatory compliance. Rodriguez adjusted her uniform, the embodiment of professional restraint. After all, she concluded, we humans are absolutely committed to maintaining diplomatic relations and following proper procedures. She paused, her smile sharpening. It's just that sometimes proper procedures include parkour and weaponized hot sauce. As the human delegation departed, several delegates swore they saw Chen casually walk up a wall to retrieve a dropped stylus, though by the time they looked again he was seated like a model diplomat. Ambassador HFY's final stress fracture echoed through the chamber as faint murmurs of, "Where do we file the paperwork for spontaneous architectural reinterpretation?" reached his auditory sensors. Somewhere in the now sideways gravity cargo bay, the faint echo of dad jokes lingered for diplomatic reasons, of course.